And hello and welcome to Reiki Women Podcast. It's me, Bronwen Logan, and I'm here with my wonderful colleagues. We have Carrie, Varela, and we have Michaela, Daystar. Hi, guys. Now, today we're going to talk about something that has to do with each one of us and what we're up to in our lives, and also about you and what you're up to in your life. So we're talking about practice groups, coming together and working together with the system of Reiki after having studied the system of Reiki. So you've done a class, and then what? What do you do? So we're talking about how each of us organizes that in our lives, and also just the benefits of what it means to come together in community and share, and why that's such a great thing. And we have something incredibly special. We've decided that we've so enjoyed doing these podcasts, and we keep learning ourselves with these podcasts, and we'd like to continue sharing that too. So we're going to start a monthly practice group for Reiki Women Podcasts. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later. And I think Michaela's going to talk about that because she's going to be our first guinea pig. Thank you, Michaela. And yes, it's very exciting. So we're each going to take one each month, which will be really nice. It'll give us great variety. And we get to be teachers and students at the same time and come together in community with all of you. So I'm very excited about that. So let's have a little chat about the benefits of coming together in community and why we do it. Carrie, I am going to start with you today. Yeah.
So when I think about community, I think and coming together and practicing in community, if I open it up, I think there's a lot of really good reasons to do that. I also think there's a few intentions that you have to clarify when you're coming together in community, and maybe I'll speak to those at the end. But for now, when I think about the importance of practicing in community, it brings to mind non-duality, and also brings to mind this ancient Sanskrit chant said Om Mani Padme Hum. And a definition of Om Mani Padme Hum is, let's see, I had it. Okay, so the interdependence in our path as Reiki protection, as a Reiki practitioners, there's an interdependence between method and wisdom. And through that method and wisdom, you can transform your impure body, mind, and speech into the pure and exalted body, mind, and speech of the Buddha. And that speaks to non-duality. So non-duality being that definition of between method and practice, and between wisdom and practice. So wisdom is the teachings. Wisdom is the things that we talk about in our on our podcast every week. We talk about some wisdom, some jewel from Reiki. And if we just talked about it and all we did was talk about it, then it would only take us this far. So we actually have to practice it. And we practice it in our lives. And I know for me, every week when I do this podcast, it sparks something inside of me that invites me to practice and to employ in my life. But it's also really powerful to do that in community. And if we are only focused on one, if we're only focused on the wisdom and taking in those teachings and just accumulating teachings like we accumulate money in our bank account, it only takes us so far. We actually have to put them into practice. And I don't know how many times I've tried to do that, like been like, oh, this teaching is so wonderful, and think about it and it seems really nice. And then I try to put it into my life, and I hit like a big, huge wall because it's hard. It's hard. It's it's easy enough to say, just for today, I'm not going to anger. But then what happens when you run up against your anger? You have to work with it. You have to see it. You have to ultimately transform it. So that's what I think one of the benefits of practicing Reiki in community. It gives us this structure that we can actually put these things, these pieces of wisdom, into our life in a really meaningful way. And they go together. So another analogy from Buddhism is say that wisdom and practice is like your right and left hand, and that wisdom washes the hands of practice, and practice washes the hands of wisdom. So likewise, when we're just stuck in our practice, or we get really rigid about what our practice looks like, and it becomes this very monotonous, boring thing, then we have to actually come back to the wisdom piece. We have to come back into a part of the practice that really sparks our interest and sparks our intellect, and sparks, that sensation that this is something that we want to work on. So I'm really looking forward to bringing that piece into the Reiki Women podcast. And so a monthly opportunity to really put some of these things into practice in our own inner world. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So often, when we're chatting at the end of a podcast, we say, wow, there was a practice that really would have worked great with that topic. And this just isn't the container for that, right? This is a container for conversation, for the wisdom sharing, for the connecting, but not necessarily the practice. And so it really felt like there was this other hand, right? As you say, that needed to come into this community space. I also, when we thought about this topic, went right to a quote that is one that I use on my webpage about our community of practice for Heartscapes from the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, which says that we cannot be human by ourselves, that we are only human in relationship to others. And, this really has been poignant for me in my life because I've had a lot of experiences of aloneness and loneliness and isolation. And I feel like a lot of my life has been seeking community, sometimes striving and efforting for community, which can bring up some of the imbalanced, unhealthy factors that you were perhaps alluding to, Carrie. And so when there's been opportunity for me to step into a well-designed, well thought out, committed, healthy community of practice, it's been, the most important aspects of my life. And this spans all manner of specific areas of focus, not just Reiki. But when I first began learning Reiki, I'll always be incredibly grateful to my first teacher, Elizabeth, because she had already spent a great deal of effort creating a robust community of practice around, her student community. And, this is just one of her gifts, one of her skills. She's a very extroverted person. She's very community oriented, very oriented towards spiritual direction and doing that in groups. And so it was really not only supportive and beautiful for me, but also instructive to me when I decided to begin teaching and, have my own space. It was like there wasn't any thought in my mind that there would be a community of practice associated with the work that I was offering. And that has been one of the most challenging and also important aspects of growing not only my personal practice, but my business as well. Because when we invite each other to gather around something that really matters to us, like a spiritual practice does, we're going to bring all of the aspects of ourself, right? We're going to bring the parts of ourself that are dedicated to the practice, the parts of ourself that are resistant to it, the parts that are totally irritated by the habits of other people, right? The parts of ourself that just really desperately want to be connected to others. All of those parts and more come into a community of practice. And so thinking through how we're going to hold a container that is, I think back to teachings that, have come through Bronwen, you and Franz, the idea of something that is firm and flexible, that, what is the container that's going to be strong enough, firm enough to really hold a diverse group of people who are passionate about a shared interest and who are very different, who have different needs, different ways of wanting to be in community, and then also having the flexibility to allow people to show up and kind of get what they need. Communities of practice can look a whole lot of different ways. That first Reiki community of practice with my first teacher was in person. She had it structured a particular way that involved teachings, often teachings from other modalities. She liked to bring in lots of other things. And then we would do Tanahira hands-on practice together. Later on, she started adding in meditative practices and kind of folding in more of the elements of the system of Reiki, but primarily it was a Tenohira practice group. Of course, there's plethoras of online groups, which is its own special container, right? Its own special way of holding a group that has its own challenges and benefits. And so all of this is, guided my thinking in terms of creating communities of practice, my discernment when I think about which communities of practice I want to step into, because as a teacher and a holder of this space, I have to acknowledge that it's also important for me to step in as a learner into other people's spaces and to allow myself to be guided and facilitated too. There's a certain medicinal value to my practice, to giving over some of the control of how a community space runs. And I am aware that I like things to be the way that I like them. And so if I'm in charge of the group, I get to make it that way, right? Community spaces are fantastic mirrors to hold up to ourselves, right? So I became very aware of that as I designed my own community of practice and then stepped into other people's. It's like, wow, I really want to be in control of it. That was a point of learning and growth that I still work with. But ultimately, for me, in building my practice and making it something that can be actually sustainable in my life over time, which is really the goal, right? This is not something we drop into for a weekend and get our certification and get our attunement and then off we go. And that's the end of our Reiki journey, right? It is a practice, literally. When we stop practicing, we stop interfacing with Reiki in that conscious way. And so for me, and I think this is probably true for most of us as social animals that evolved in social groups, that doing anything that's worthwhile, that feeds us, that serves us in community is incredibly important. And being able to do those things on our own and to have our own individual practice that is self-guided, that is solitary, that being able to step away from the group and have that time to be in self-reflective practice is equally important. And so finding that balance between the two has been a really important thing for me, especially given my background that had a deficit of community, right? Where it was like everything was on my own. I felt like I was on my own for most of my childhood. And so I've had to be careful not to get out of balance with community and go away from being by myself. So that was a lot. There was a lot of thoughts that kind of came through my mind as we thought about this. It's a topic I'm obviously very passionate about, and I'm really excited to get to explore it with you and with our listeners.
Yeah, look, I agree. I can relate to absolutely everything that both of you said. I love, Carrie, the wisdom and the method and the two working together, and they don't work alone, because that's us, isn't it? We are all of that. And if you think about it, we can say, for example, the method is the practical, so we could take that as being that earth part of us. We can say the method is the mental, also intuitive aspect of us, and when we bring those together, we are that heart-based being, that whole complete being. And that sense of wholeness is what comes out of that. I love that. And then Michaela talking about aloneness, that's just so touching, because I think we've all felt that. I know, I felt that. I imagine that it's something that everyone at some point has experienced, to different degrees, obviously, but that when we touch on that, we know that feeling, and how important it is to be with others, and how special it can be to be feeling accepted. I don't know how else to say that, in a group, without being judged, without being anything, but being in that group, of that group. And it's incredibly special. And it would be wonderful if within Reiki Women Podcasts, we could we're managing to do that together, the three of us, and I think that's really beautiful, and I really appreciate both of you so much, and love being in a group with you both. Our pod, as Michaela calls it. And taking that then and expanding that out is incredibly special, and I do hope that other people will come and share that with us, and share that sense of openness and love and heart-based care. The thing that I think about coming together in community is that touchstone, which you both talked about, and how we can have that. Michaela was saying that personal practice needs to be there, but if we're totally on our own with our practice, where does that go? And some of us, we don't necessarily have teachers that we can go to. A lot of people will study with a teacher and then move on from that fine. Find new teachers, find new ways, new mentors, and there's millions of them out there, allowing that to help you in your practice, because being on your own in a practice can, as we know, peter out. It can be lonesome. It can mean us going off on a track that actually doesn't serve us. So being in community can really support that. And it is that touchstone where we can come back to something and keep coming back to something. So great that we can create that together. And each of us as well, we just wanted to do a quick one today, because this is a quick podcast today, apparently. So we're trying to get through it. So I would just like to say that, we each of us have our own practice groups as well that we hold for our students and community. So, it's like, what are those things called? The Venn diagrams. We're all sort of interlocking over each other, and which is really beautiful, because we create a whole world that is in some sense connected teachings wise as well, which is really beautiful. So I'm going to go first and just say that I've been developing my own website business, Reiki with Bronwen, and I have some online practices that I do with groups. So I have an online coaching group every second week on a Sunday/Monday, depends where you live. And I have a weekly Reiju that I do, just 15 minutes long, which I'm loving doing. And I have a new one starting up, because as I was saying, all good things come in threes. So I also have a healing group, which will be once a month. So all online. And it's a great way to create community, because people can drop in and out whenever they need to, and it's always there. And I know for all of us with what we create, that is a really beautiful, special thing. So I hope to see you guys there, and I'm going to pass that on to Carrie.
Okay, so I kind of alluded to it. We already a little spoke to some of, maybe I don't think that there's a whole lot of downside to practicing in community. I really don't. But as a yoga practitioner and a Reiki practitioner, I can speak almost a little bit more to my yoga experience. And I think of the times where I've also felt really lonely. Like there was times after my divorce that I was just so lonely, and my main recourse was just to roll out my mat and to do yoga classes in public spaces. It felt really good, and I didn't have to tell anybody about how lonely I was, but I could just be there and be like soaking in all these other people, and it felt really, really good to me. And so that was as we all go through ups and downs in our life, knowing that there are community spaces available to us, and really reaching out and being in those spaces. And you don't even have to tell anybody what's going on or share that much of your experience with anybody. But sometimes that can be just super nourishing and healing in and of itself, especially when we're going through something that's really intense. But I can also say that there are times where comparison and self-judgment and criticism and ego really can show up in communities too. So, times where I wasn't having the highest self-esteem day, and I'd go to a yoga class and of a teacher I admire, and then I just spend the whole time beating myself up, thinking how amazing they are and how shitty I am, and that's not healthy either. So in our practice groups, I think that mindset and intention that we bring to it is so important, and to notice that when we do come into community spaces in a place where you're feeling like there's a lack inside of you, that you're not good enough, that you need something or something more in order to support other people, or you get excited about somebody else's charisma and don't have a way to tap into your own charisma. All those things I've really been challenged with. And there's times where even a really wonderful, beautiful community experience can, if my mindset isn't in the right place, if I'm not ready to sit into a place of studentship and really like kind of shed or be guided by somebody else into an experience, I can resist that, and then I can take that resistance with me into my life too in a negative way. So I think nobody knows what our intentions are when we show up for anything, but it's as just a mindset hack, coming into it with a willingness to be a student. And I think that is so important on our spiritual journey as teachers of any craft. A willingness to sit, in that role of studentship. And if we come to it every time as I'm the expert in the room and I can't, I'm just sitting here completely disagreeing with whatever anybody else says, then we can't really take in the practice either, right? There's just so much judgment there. So we're not really stepping into a place where we can be led into an experience by somebody else. So those are just things that I know that I have been so sensitive to in my years of doing this work. And so in my community groups, I'm definitely going to encourage us all to try to get beyond all that crap and move into a place where we can really actually practice, like really, really actually can sit with these teachings without being in our head about who's better, who's worse, or that kind of mindset is something we're definitely going to be working on getting out of our community space so we can really be in better mindset.
Yeah. And Carrie, I know you have a couple of in-person community practice sessions coming up. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah. And I'm excited to do more of this, and I'm really looking forward to doing more through the Reiki Women Podcast. Is kind of my two right now. And then this year I committed to offering an in-person Reiki practice circle in my community, and I know that that's a huge thing that almost anybody who's started Reiki or taken a Reiki course in the last few years is really lacking. It's hard to find people to practice Reiki with, sometimes more so for some people than others, and no judgment there, of course, but like sometimes it's hard, you run out of friends and family to work with. It's so important when you first learn Reiki, and well into many years after learning Reiki, is to give yourself opportunities just to simply receive, to have containers where you can go and be amongst like-minded folks. And I had my students come last weekend actually for a Reiki practice circle, and so many of them had we had so many questions about, well, how heavy should my hands be, and really there's something really wonderful about getting that feedback also from whoever is receiving your Reiki. I know that once you're charging money, you really sometimes you can get that feedback, of course, but sometimes there's no opportunity for that honest feedback. So we spent a lot of time offering each other feedback or just sharing what we experienced, and so important when we're doing Reiki. So I definitely hope to offer more practice groups, and actually through my Facebook community, Reiki Healing Society. Hopefully very soon I'll be offering I want to say a weekly mentorship circle, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get there. So at least monthly mentorship circle where we can just come together as practitioners and kind of hash through issues, challenges we're having in a Reiki practice. And so that's coming soon.
So good. I love it. Ah, yes, yes. I really appreciate, Carrie, you speaking to, these challenges that can come up when we come together in community, because if we ignore the presence of those things that are so natural and normal and truly are the substance and the meat that we're actually working with in the system of Reiki, it's right there in the precepts, right? Just for today, I will not worry about my practice not being as good as somebody else's. Just for today, I will not be angry about, wishing that I was in a different place, or whatever the case is. Just for today, I'll have compassionate, feelings towards myself and others in this community. It's the place where the rubber hits the road, and we really are able to, get the real-time feedback from how we feel when we're with other people about the status of our practice, right? Because if we can't draw on our practice and have it alive and have it regulating our system and bringing us back to a point of being grounded and being spacious and being connected when we're in relationship with other people, then it's of limited value. You know, if we can only access it when we're alone on our meditation pillow, then it's not seeping into our life. And so that's, you know, the other piece of this is that communities of practice are places for us to, you know, be vulnerable and kind of, you know, test out the integrity of our practice, right? To what degree is this really shifting my relationship with the world and with other people? And I see that alive, you know, in the groups that I facilitate and in the groups that I enter into as a practitioner. Some of the spaces that I offer folks, in terms of specifically practice spaces, there's two primary ones. One is a monthly online group that, you know, we work with a variety of practices from the origins of Reiki, along with, you know, place to troubleshoot questions, you know, do a little bit of teaching topic if people are interested in. It's a very fluid space. There's kind of a loose structure to, you know, how that space operates, really responding to whoever shows up, kind of as a drop-in space. And then once per quarter, around the equinoxes and solstices, I offer a 21-day practice where we focus on a particular practice or set of practices or themes that are drawn from the origins of Reiki. We've worked with the Medicine Buddha mantra, we've worked with the Heart Sutra, we've worked with the nature-based elements of Shinto practice. And coming up in March for the spring equinox, we are working with Sun Mitsu and diving into practices of the body, the breath, and the mind, and how they work together. And that's 21 days of half-hour practice sessions that are recorded. And is it time to say a little bit about the RWP practice group? Yeah, so as we said, you know, pretty early on in cultivating this space between the three of us and between those of you, dear listeners, who are with us on this journey, we had this longing to share practices. And we knew that this format was a space for conversation, but that for every topic that we talk about, there's some form of practice that feels really juicy and alive, aligned with it. And so it felt like an obvious evolution to offer a practice circle. And so we will be launching that in April. It will be the first Sunday of every month, US time, I believe, first Monday of the month, Australia time. It will be online, and the topics that we will focus on will be drawn from the topics of the previous month's podcasts. So we'll dip back into this month of March, for example, for our launch in April, and we will bring forward practices that relate in some way to the topics that come forward in this month's conversations, which is a very fertile ground, because if you've been with us for any time, you know that the topics for the weekly podcast really kind of come out of spontaneous conversation. It's a very fluid way in which topics come to us, which means that it's very interactive with all of you as well. We will be rotating facilitation of that space so that you will get the opportunity to be led in practice by each of us. I believe I will be taking April to get us started. And so you'll get an opportunity to be in practice with each of us facilitating, and the other two of us will get a chance to be facilitated too. Again, really being able to walk that beautiful space between facilitating and being facilitated too, being able to settle into that student practitioner role. We are working out the details of registration and cost, but it will be very accessible. It will be very straightforward. Right now, the community space that we have for Reiki Women Podcast is the Facebook group and the Facebook page. Eventually, there might be a website dedicated to Reiki Women Podcast. At this time, that is the space that we have to kind of gather and share out information all together as Reiki Women Podcast. There will be links to join those two spaces down below if you are Facebook inclined. However, the three of us also have our own websites and email lists. And so each of us who is facilitating that month will be, highlighting that month's practice group in our spaces, and probably the others will also be sharing it out as well. And so if you're on any of our email lists, you'll be getting information about this monthly Reiki Women podcast practice group. And if you're on the Facebook group, you will also have the notifications coming there too, as well as a space to have ongoing conversation and dialogue about what we experience. So I think that is that's the overview, that's the landscape. The details will be coming clear as we work with this format, but we're very excited to get going the first Sunday of April 2023, which will be April 2nd. Have I missed anything, ladies?
I don't think so.
Comprehensive overview.
No, yeah, I think also knowing that there is now a Reiki Women podcast group on Facebook. So for the last year or so, we've just had our page, and now we have a group. So that's a great space where we'll be facilitating a few more conversations. There'll be sometimes I don't get as many notifications if I see a post through a page that I'm liking. As opposed to being a part of the group, you'll probably see those posts a little bit more often in your feed. So you won't forget to join.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. And that's also a more private space for having conversations. We also do have a direct email for Reiki Women Podcasts that we'll put down below as well, if you want to email us about any of that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to you two women and to our listeners. And we'll be seeing you in a week's time. Yep. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.